In an era dominated by platformers and mascots, Streets of Rage was something different. It was gritty, raw, and it didn't hold back. This was the game that made you feel like you could take on the world one street thug at a time. But why did this game, with its simple beat-em-up mechanics, leave such a lasting impact? Why do gamers, decades later, still talk about it with such reverence? This isn't just a story about a video game, it's a story about how a team of developers at Sega created a franchise that not only stood the test of time, but also defined a genre. Today we're going to dive deep into the world of Streets of Rage. We'll explore its origins, its groundbreaking gameplay, and the legendary music that became just as iconic as the game itself. By the end, you'll understand why Streets of Rage wasn't just another game. It was a cultural phenomenon that helped shape the beat-em-up genre as we know it. So, grab your controller and let's head back to the streets where it all began. The story of Streets of Rage begins in the early 1990s, a period when Sega was in a heated battle for dominance in the home console market against Nintendo. The Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive as it is known outside of North America, needed a game that could not only showcase the console's power, but also offer something different from Nintendo's more family-friendly lineup. Enter the Sega AM7 team, a group of developers tasked with creating a game that would capture the imaginations of players around the globe. The concept was straightforward, a beat-em-up inspired by the popular arcade hits of the time like Final Fight and Double Dragon. But Sega wanted more than just a carbon copy of what was already out there. They wanted a game that would leverage the unique strengths of the Genesis hardware while also delivering something fresh. A game that could stand toe-to-toe with the best in the genre and bring the excitement of the arcade right into your living room. The development team was led by none other than Noriyoshi Oba, a relatively young producer with a clear vision. Work on Streets of Rage began in the late 1990s, with a tight timeline that would see the game ready for release by August 1991. The development process was intense. The team faced technical challenges like squeezing all of the graphics, music, and gameplay into the limited memory capacity of a 16-bit cartridge. Streets of Rage launched in Japan known as Bare Knuckle Ikari no Tekken on August 2, 1991, and hit North America and Europe shortly thereafter. The initial reception was strong, with praise for its graphics, sound, and multiplayer gameplay. But what truly set Streets of Rage apart from other games was how it captured the feeling of being in an 80s action movie. With its tight controls, engaging combat, and a soundtrack that would rival any Hollywood score. It immediately stood out in the crowded beat-em-up market. The game quickly developed a dedicated fanbase, and Sega knew they had something special on their hands. Something that could be more than just a one-off hit. At its core, Streets of Rage is a beat-em-up, a game where you walk from left to right, taking down waves of enemies with fists, feet, and the occasional blunt object. Players start by choosing one of three characters: Alex Stone, Blaze Fielding, or Adam Hunter. Each character had their own unique set of attributes and fighting styles, which added a strategic layer to the game. Axel was the balanced fighter, with a mix of speed and power. Blaze was the quickest and most agile, but slightly less powerful. And Adam was the powerhouse, delivering the strongest attacks but moving at a slower pace. This character differentiation was crucial. It encouraged players to experiment with different playstyles and provided an added level of replayability. Combat in Streets of Rage was simple yet deceptively deep. The game featured a single attack button for basic moves, but by combining it with directional inputs, players could execute a range of attacks, including jump kicks, base attacks, and special throws. Mastering these moves was essential, especially as the enemies became tougher and more numerous in later levels. You had to learn when to go on the offensive and when to retreat, how to handle your enemies coming from multiple directions, and how to use the environment to your advantage. One of the most iconic gameplay elements was the use of special attacks, which were limited but powerful moves that could clear the screen of enemies. These special attacks came in the form of police car driving onto the screen and launching a barrage of rockets or bullets, wiping out any enemies in sight. It was a spectacular visual moment and served as a kind of lifeline for players who found themselves overwhelmed by enemies. However, these attacks were limited in supply, forcing players to think strategically about when to use them. Then there were the weapons: pipes, knives, bottles, and even baseball bats scattered throughout each level. These items could be picked up and used to inflict extra damage on enemies. But weapons could also be dropped if the player was hit, adding a risk-reward element to their use. Would you hold on to that steel pipe for a tougher enemy ahead, or swing it wildly to get through a rough patch? The choice was yours, and it added another layer of depth to the game's seemingly straightforward combat. So when Streets of Rage hit the market in 1991, it wasn't just another entry in the beat-em-up genre. It was a shot of adrenaline that sent ripples through the gaming world. Released at a time when arcades were still the epicenter of the gaming experience, Streets of Rage managed to bring that same intensity and excitement to the home console. It took the beat-em-up formula and refined it, setting a new standard for what others would soon follow. The game quickly gained a reputation for its gritty, urban aesthetic and its dynamic cooperative gameplay. It offered something different from the cartoonish, family-friendly games that dominated the landscape. For many players, Streets of Rage was their first taste of a game that felt more mature, more intense. A title that didn't shy away from showing the darker side of city life, with its corrupt bosses, street gangs, and neon-lit, rain-soaked backdrops. The game's impact was particularly strong in North America and Europe, where it found a wide audience among Genesis/Mega Driver owners. It became a staple in gaming magazines and was the subject of playground chatter. Players loved the chance to team up with a friend, share the laughs and frustrations, and plan out their attacks together. The cooperative mode became a defining feature, turning the game into a social experience and fostering a sense of camaraderie that extended beyond the screen. The success of this game laid the groundwork for a franchise that would continue to evolve over the next several decades. Following the release of the first game, Sega quickly realized they had struck gold and began to work on a sequel to capitalize on the momentum. Streets of Rage 2 was released in 1992, and it did what every great sequel should. It took the core of what made the original game special and expanded on it in nearly every way. In 1994, Sega released Streets of Rage 3, which aimed to push the series even further. It featured a more complex plot, multiple endings, and a refined combat system with new moves, including running and dodging. However, the game made some controversial changes, such as a higher difficulty level and a more experimental soundtrack that didn't quite resonate with all fans. While Streets of Rage 3 was well received, it did not achieve the same level of acclaim or sales as its predecessor, and it marked the end of the series' original run on the Genesis. After the release of Streets of Rage 3, the franchise went into a kind of dormancy. Sega shifted its focus to newer consoles and franchises, and the beat-em-up genre, in general, began to fade from the mainstream. However, the fan community kept the spirit of the series alive. Over the years, fans created mods, unofficial sequels, and remixes of the game's music, demonstrating a lasting passion for the world and characters of Streets of Rage. The true revival came in 2020 with the release of Streets of Rage 4. Developed by Totemu, Lizard Cube, and Guard Crush Games, this new installment was a long-awaited contribution that sought to bring the series into the modern era while staying true to its roots. This game featured hand-drawn animations, a new story that picked up 10 years after the events of Streets of Rage 3, and a refined combat system that retained the classic feel while adding new layers of depth. Streets of Rage 4 also paid a homage to its past with a mix of new and returning characters, including Axel, Blaze, and Adam, alongside with newcomers Cherry Hunter, the daughter of Adam, and Floyd Iria, a powerful brawler with cybernetic enhancements. The game featured both new and classic soundtracks, with original compositions by Yuzo Koshiro and other guest composers who honored the series' musical legacy. And there you have it, the tale of Streets of Rage, a game that dared to ask, what if you could solve all of society's problems with a good old-fashioned punch to the face? From its humble beginnings on the Sega Genesis to its triumphant return in the modern era, this franchise has fought its way into the hearts of gamers worldwide. It proved that sometimes all you need to make a classic is a bunch of street thugs, a killer soundtrack, and just enough plot to justify it all. Until next time, keep your fists up, your reflexes sharp, and whatever you do, don't forget to call in that special attack when things get rough. After all, in the streets of rage, a little overkill never hurt anyone. Except all those poor goons who picked the wrong night to mess with you. Cue credits, cue music, and let's take it back to those city streets one more time. If you enjoyed exploring the history and making of Streets of Rage, click this video here to see more from the Retro Reload. And as always, thank you for watching.